Thank you guys again for having us. My name, as Veronica said, is Adura Nyekwere. I'm a program associate with the Vera Institute of Justice's Reshaping Prosecution program. I'll pass to my colleague quickly.
Hi everyone, I'm Steve Roberts. I'm also with the Reshaping Prosecution initiative at Vera Institute of Justice.
So this is going to be kind of what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about a little bit of what our program is about, what we do, the power of the prosecutor. We're going to enter into do some data, a little bit of data talk, and then hopefully talk about some reforms as well as how reforms equate to public safety. Veronica did an amazing job of introducing our institute. I didn't know she was going to do that, so I'm like, now I don't need this page. Just quickly, our institute is a national nonprofit that partners with government stakeholders to improve justice systems, to end mass incarceration using administrative data. This is a beautiful picture of our wonderful Reshaping Prosecution program, which has grown so much in size since I started in 2020. But our program is full of former prosecutors, former public defenders, researchers, policy analysts, and even teachers. So we have a very large team with a lot of different skills on it, which I think makes us pretty amazing. So the main tenets of our team, we are founded on three main tenets, which are to shrink the front end of the system, and by that, as you know, the heading of our team is called Reshaping Prosecution. So really focusing on the front end of the system that prosecutors have power to control or have power over, addressing systemic racial disparities and increasing accountability to directly impacted communities. And the way that we do that, is jurisdictions that seem aligned with our goals. After an application process, we invite them to work with us or work together with them in a 1 year to 18-month kind of multi-part engagement towards those three main tenets that I spoke about earlier. Now, the parts of that engagement are one, a qualitative analysis where we take data from the prosecutor's office and we do a racial disparity analysis or just analyze the data to look at the different trends. We have another part, which is a qualitative analysis where we get to talk to some of the members of the office to get context to the data like a more direct approach, speaking with the office or staff members might give us. But the second part of that qualitative analysis is actually speaking with you guys, which is the community members. And the reason that we do that is because we understand that the criminal legal system doesn't just touch one person or one area. It doesn't just hit the criminal legal system and then go. We know it touches friends, families, children, etc. So it has a wide-ranging impact on people. So that's why we want to talk to community members. We also do a little bit of culture work we've designed a curriculum that select members from the DA's office are part of a working group, and that curriculum teaches about the history of race and prosecution, what survivors want, all the way to talking about, policy development. So it's a pretty thorough curriculum. Now, sorry, still not used to this mic. So just to get to today's presentation, so we're going to dive in a little bit about why we do this work, which is simply that prosecutors wield a lot of power, meaning that the choices and decisions that they make can have immense reverberating impacts, both positive and negative, for someone accused and extending throughout families and communities. So first, when you talk about the power of prosecution, first kind of have to know who works at the office. You have your district attorney, who's Dinah Beckton, and they're usually appointed or elected. You have your ADAs or your assistant district attorneys that are organized into different specialty units. Some of the units that are within your own district attorney's office are screening and charging unit, conviction integrity, so on and so forth. But then you also have a group of individuals that I call them non-legal staff members, but they're extremely crucial to helping the office operate, which are victim witness advocates, paralegals, investigators, admin staff, etc. So, when we are talking about prosecutorial power, what we are really talking about is that the power prosecutors wield at different decisions made throughout the life of a case in the areas of charging and diversion, bail, discovery and pleas, and sentencing. Now, to really understand the weight of when we say the power of the prosecutor, we have to answer certain questions, which are, what are all of these things? What is charging? What is diversion? What is bail? What is discovery? Like, what are these things? Then you ask, how do prosecutors decide how to charge? How do they decide to send someone to a diversion program? And then at the end of that, you have to then ask or look at, within the mechanics of these decision points, what opportunities do prosecutors have to make choices within charging, the diversion, bail, discovery, etc. So for example, if you're looking at charging, you're looking at, prosecutors decide which charges, are there going to be lesser charges, whether they're going to be stacked, etc. Then for diversion, they might be the ones that decide whether someone goes into a diversion program or whether those alternatives are offered. And to paint a clearer picture, we have to also understand that with that power does come certain limitations. We have to see that, unfortunately there are certain legal and legislative limitations that prosecutors do have to abide by, which like mandatory minimums, sentencing guidelines, etc. And we also have to be clear that the criminal legal system is very reactive, and so while our program does work with prosecutors to shrink the front end of the system, there are so many other systems that lead people into the criminal legal system that could be a lot more helpful and a lot more proactive in ensuring harm isn't done to communities, and that communities are healthy and thriving, such as education, food and agricultural industries. There's so many other systems that, there a lot of work could be done to ensure that people don't end up in the system in the first place. And I will say that having limitations doesn't mean that there's solutions, it just means that there's different angles that we can look at it. I'm going to turn over to my colleague.
Thanks, Adari, and thank you, everyone. First of all, for letting us into your community. We did come from a long way away. We're not from here, but we're glad to be here. I introduced myself a little earlier. I work from Vera's Justice, but I'm also one of the researchers. Adari mentioned the one team. I'm a researcher. In fact, I'm a quantitative researcher, so I spend a lot of time with numbers. And I'm going to step through some numbers as I go through this part of the presentation. I feel like it's too loud. This is just a statement about the role of data. But when we come to work with an office, and we are working with DA, Director's Office, we want to take a look at the data so we can see what's going on in this particular jurisdiction to get a deeper understanding of what leads to mass incarceration, what leads to racial disparities. So we actually are working with the data. I have it in hand, had it for a while, and the sad part is I'm not quite done with that analysis, so I won't be talking about that yet today. We're going to wrap that in the next couple of months. But I have a whole lot of other more public-facing data that I can share with you that helps to frame the reason we're here, the reason that the district attorney has invited us to look at her own data to get this deeper understanding. So Adora already showed you these bubbles, these three signs. I'm going to talk about each one of it a little bit. So the first element of our program is shrinking the front end of the system. So we use data to contextualize the cumulative impact of prosecution individual decisions. So what happens in a prosecution office is many cases come, there are many ADAs working on the cases, and each one is an individual case, and the district attorneys are looking at the facts of that case and making their decisions. But it adds up to a whole, and sometimes that whole is not what we want to see. When you look at the aggregations, when you the disparities and the layering adds up to punishment and mass incarceration and racial disparities. So that's the front of the system. We are addressing racial disparities. As I mentioned, you can find that in data by looking at charging and deeper dive into each element of the process and of charging. And the third one is increasing accountability to directly impact communities. And we can do that by encouraging openness with the data, sharing the findings that we will come up with, or even creating dashboards or access to the data so that the community can continue this work going forward. So now I'm going to step through the data. This, like I said, is mostly public-facing data, but it's aggregated in a way so we can understand the context within the United States, California, Contra Costa County. And this is kind of like a little exercise that we go through to kind of help understand why we look at racial disparities. And it's a little exercise that we call biological or society. So as you look at differences in outcomes, you can determine whether it's biological or societal. For example, the average height in the United States for women is 5 feet 4 inches, and for men is 5 feet 9 inches. So is that biological or societal? And you can shout it out, or I can just say it. It's very clearly biological. And the population is about 51% women and 49% men. That's biological. The CEOs of Fortune 500 companies are 93% men and 7% women. That is not biological, that's society. That's the outcome of a long historical process. US senators are a little bit more balanced, but we really can't quite call them balanced. These are median incomes by race for white people, Latino, Latinx people, or Black people. White people, the median income is in the 70,000s, Latinx is 54,000, and for Black it's 41,000. Clearly, that is the accumulation of a history into society. And now coming closer to home, this is the U.S. prison population. This is per 100,000 people. So we measure things in rates so that we can compare groups of different sizes. So the looking at white people, out of every 100,000 white people, 268 are in prison. Out of every 100,000 Latinx people, 797 are in prison. And out of every 100,000 Black people, 1,501 are in prison. Clearly a societal question. So I know that a lot of this is going to be intuitive, people who know this, but sometimes seeing the numbers really helps you understand the starkness of what we're seeing here. This is the last one of these slides. This is actually the jail population in New York City, Rutgers Island. You've probably heard of it. It's actually quite a horrible place, and I've actually visited several times, and it's hopefully being shut down. But you see that the white population in New York City is 55%, and the white population of the jail is 11%. And looking all the way to the right, the Black population in New York City is 17%, and the population is 59%. It's very clear when you look at prison in the jail there, what's going on, who ends up in jail. Throughout this presentation, I'm going to be drawing some pretty stark contrast between white and Black, but this is true for all Black, brown, poor people. It includes Latin people, as I mentioned, Asian people. So it's, I don't mean to be like too focused on one, but that's usually you see the stark disparities. Anyway, I'm going to go on to mass incarceration. You've all heard that term. This shows the rate at which people are imprisoned in the United States. So we are the world's leader in incarceration by a long shot. You see that out of 100,000 Americans, or maybe 100,000 adult Americans, 655 in prison. The next 3 countries are, either poor countries or illiberal countries or, totalitarian kind of countries, and they have incarceration lower than us. And then as you have to get down to like Australia and Spain, where you actually see countries that we might compare with, developed, westernized, relatively wealthy country, and their rates are a lot lower. And it's not really hard to find headlines such as these about the unjustness of this mass incarceration for Black people, Native Americans, Latinos, and Asian Americans. And the whole thing is deeply rooted in our history. We can go back very far. I'm going to start with the 13th Amendment because we know that slavery started to end. It ended with the Emancipation Proclamation. the 13th Amendment is what put into the Constitution. But you see that slavery and involuntary servitude were ended with this one exception, except as a punishment for a crime. And that led to all those outcomes that we see repercussions of today. And this is kind of an outline of many different steps along the way. So we saw slavery, the 13th Amendment, which allowed for this one exception for involuntary servitude. Black codes, which are a series of laws that were targeting Black people to arrest them, incarcerate them, and effectively turn them back into slaves. Separate but equal Jim Crow was, the decades following that, and continued on well through the 60s and probably through today too. The war on drugs and crime is another way to criminalize Black, brown people, and here we are with mass incarceration. So this isn't something that just popped up now. It's something that's been growing. It's been continuing for centuries. Here is kind of an action and reaction. You might see steps forward, followed by reactionary steps backwards. So we had slavery, which ended with the Emancipation Proclamation, but then the 13th Amendment put in the Constitution that you could have involuntary servitude for punishment crimes. Reconstruction lasted about 2 decades until 1876, was followed by Black codes, terror, lynchings. Moving to urban areas, which we think was the Great Migration, was followed by separate but equal, and the criminalization of civil rights, which was followed by the Civil Rights Movement. Again, the backlash with the war on drugs, and again, mass incarceration. You can read this quote, or maybe I'll read it with you, but this is a direct quote from John Laudemer, who was one of President Nixon's chief advisors. And he said, "We knew we could make it illegal to be either against the war or Black, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and Blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest the leaders, raid their homes, break up the meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did." And this is a slide about drugs, which shows that the intentionality is directed towards people of color. I'm not going to try to go through these. I think it's kind of hard to read this slide, but what it shows is that Black people and white people are known to use drugs at about the same rate. But as you step through from use to arrests to sentencing and then who is in prison, the disparities grow and grow and grow until the point where I'm not going to use the numbers here, but today you see a lot more Black people in prison and jail due to drugs. And this is, even though the rates of use are the same, so it's targeting, it's over-policing of minority neighborhoods, or more intentional prosecution or arrest of Black people, and more of a wave for white people. This is where we are now. If the system continues as it is now, 1 of every 17 white males will be in prison, 1 of every 6 Latino males, and 1 of every 3 Black males born in 2001 can expect to go to prison. So that number for white people, 1 out of every 17, is a really high number, and it gets much worse as we step through Black and brown people. I showed you the slide earlier of the United States versus countries in the rest of the world. This is getting pretty a little more close to home. You can see that that's the same rate that I showed you before for the United States. 664 people are out of 100,000 in prison. The rate for California is actually a little bit lower. That kind of makes sense, because the United States includes states like Texas, Louisiana, and Oklahoma. Remote things are just terrible, so the average is expected to be lower in California. That's the same number there for the United States. Here's California again. And here's Contra Costa. So Contra Costa is actually doing better than the United States and better than California. But again, we come to the peer countries, NATO countries, Western countries, and we see that Contra Costa County, even though it seems to be doing well on the United States standard, is still imprisoning people at 2.5 to 3 times the rate of other countries in the world. And then we break down the Contra Costa imprisonment rate by race, and that's the rate for white people, 135 people per 100,000 white people in the county are in prison. And it's higher for Latinx people, 210. And both of those numbers still are higher than the rest of the world. And then for Black people, it's 1,180. So this is tough. And if we look at, that's for prison. If we add jail, it gets even worse. So all of this is, I can also say that I think the 1,184 is about 8.9. I think it's on the next slide, almost 9 times the rate for white people. So if you're a Black person, you're 9 times more likely to be in prison if you come to Contra Costa County. So this is the context. This is why we go to work at Vera. It's why the DA has invited us in. She sees this herself, and she knows this. She wants to be addressed. She wants to figure out how to address it, where all this is coming from, and that's why we're going forward with it. So this is another way of looking at it. Just shows the difference. If we set white rate at 1 in Contra Costa County, we see that it's the rate is 9 times higher. But you're up. Yep.
Thank you so much for that, Steve. As you can see, like, the numbers are extremely glaring, right? And right now we're going to talk a little bit about reform as public safety. And the reason why we phrase it that way is normally when people think public safety, how is the public going to be safe? They usually think law enforcement, they think arrests, they think incarceration. But as we can see from the very stark graphs, charts, the numbers that Steve showed us just now, that is not the case. We know that incarceration doesn't work. We know the impact, the negative impact it has on families, friends, children, in so many different areas, in terms of their mental health, in terms of economic stability, in terms of physical health. There are many reports and resources that you can look at that do talk about these things, but we basically know the negative impact that incarceration has on people and on communities. So when we talk about the consequences of incarceration, there's this quote by the National Research Council that says, "The effects of high rates of incarceration extends far beyond the millions of people who have served time in jail or prisons and the families and communities they have left behind." The committee found that the increase in incarceration rates has also had broader effects on U.S. society, on civic and political participation, on fundamental notions of citizenship, on the allocation of public resources, and on the functions of the polity and the government. There is also another assumption that is made, which is that survivors of crime are served by the criminal legal system. But as we can see, only 14% of crime victims, like during a survey that was done by the Alliance for Safety and Justice, felt supported, well, very supported by the criminal justice system after they experienced a crime, while 32% of crime survivors felt not at all supported. And I would also like to point out that this is 14% of victims of crime that actually utilize the criminal justice system to begin with. Because not everyone chooses to engage with the criminal legal system, and there are many reasons for that. As you can see, there are very clear numbers that say with property crimes and with violent crimes, there are people that are choosing not to engage with the criminal legal system. This low engagement is attributed to complicated relationships within family members that maybe these offenses happen with. There's a lack of faith that the system will intervene or have the capacity to resolve the issue in the way that the survivor of the crime thinks that the issue should be resolved. And there are trust gaps between community members and law enforcement due to systemic and historical reasons. So they're not going to the criminal legal system to look for the outcome that they want. And I would also like to point out, for those that are saying, well, you'd like to utilize our criminal justice system, there are those, when they go and that they see that only less than 50% of violent crimes are actually cleared, less than, just over 10% of property crimes are actually cleared. So that doesn't really breed trust in the system, that even if you believe in the system, that this is going to be resolved. So what does that tell us? All that points out to us is that incarceration isn't working, and that there are other ways of making sure that our communities and our public is actually safe, healthy, and thriving. And we have to think about what it means when we say the words public safety, right? We want to make sure that there's roofs over our head, there's food in our bellies, we have the education, should we choose to get higher education, we are able to have access to homes. There's so many ways to ensure that a community is thriving. Incarceration, arrests, police within communities, surveillance, that is not the way to do it. And when you ask survivors what it is that they want, they agree. More than 8 out of 10 victims want to move money from prisons to treatment, rehabilitation, and prevention. And strong majorities of crime victims prefer mental health treatment, NAMI, right? Shout out. They prefer mental health treatment over incarceration for people with mental illness. So we know that the answer is not incarceration. It is in fact a resource. It is in fact treatment. It is in fact rehabilitation. And we need to be focusing on solutions that get us to the point where we want to. I'm going to turn it back over to Steve. My bad. So I completely, sorry, I was feeling the moment. So when we talk about racial disparities, a lot of the time we talk about who is being incarcerated, but we also don't talk about who is surviving these crimes to begin with. There are racial disparities within the survivors of crimes and offenses. People of color are 15% more likely to be victims of crime. Young people between the ages of 18 and 24 experience victimization at nearly 2 times the rate than any other group. So when we talk about racial disparities, it's not just who's going in, it's who's being impacted by. So it's a cycle that we have to understand and get to the solution of. So I'm going to end on this quote, which says that we must begin to envision and enact a kind of membership in society that does not harm communities, that values liberty and human connection, and does not provide safety only to those who can afford to be segregated from violence in communities and immune to the excesses of violence. Now, thank you. I'm going to pass it over.
So, we've shown you what's wrong, what people want and what they don't want, and the next question would be like, what can be done? Where can we go from here? And I can talk a little bit about what's happening in other cities in the country. This is just a few examples. I want to take a couple seconds and we can probably switch to Q&A time too. So I wanted to show you first, this is Rachel Rawlins. She was the DA in Suffolk County. This is my home city, Boston, Massachusetts, Suffolk County, Massachusetts. She's no longer DA. President Biden appointed her to be a U.S. Attorney for Massachusetts, or Eastern Massachusetts, I can't remember how it works. Oh, the whole state, okay. Yeah. But she, when she ran for DA, and when she became DA, she published a list of, I think, 15 misdemeanor crimes that she was presumptively not going to prosecute. It means she universally blanket refusal, but she was going to decline. Decline, by the way, is a term that means that when it comes to the office from law enforcement, it means I'm not going to take it. So it's not like a dismissal. Dismissal often comes with a later process after you take it, and then change your mind based on evidence or circumstances. This is just saying I'm outright not going to prosecute these crimes. So there's a series of misdemeanors. And she chose these because, as it says here, they're most commonly driven by poverty, substance use disorder, mental health issues, trauma histories, housing or physical securities. So what she said saying is that these people need help, they don't need to be punished. And you can see a whole list of crimes there that she chose not to prosecute. She got a lot of pushback, of course, but went forward anyway. And there was actually a study, there's a study that came out last year. It was a pretty rigorous, like statistical rigorous study that compared the outcomes of people who were not prosecuted, who had their cases declined, and others who were prosecuted, even if they were later dismissed, if they just looked at that as prosecuted. There were two groups, and the outcomes of these people were compared. And what we found was that non-prosecution reduced the rates at which people were subsequently charged with any new criminal complaint by 58%, were subsequently charged with violent offenses by 64%, subsequently for people subsequently charged with disorderly conduct or property offenses by 91%, and it keeps on going. So what you see is that the active prosecution for these minor offenses actually leads to worse outcomes. It is harmful because of the whole process that people are going through. So that was a really interesting outcome. It also was kind of an active pushing back. I'm going to step back a second. All the statistics I showed you are the outcomes of the process of the system. It is not strictly the DA. Even though we're working with the DA's office, it's not strictly the DA who's making all the decisions to lock up people. It is, police arrest people, prosecutors, judges, but also other supports in the community, housing, and mental health, of course, drug treatments. All these factors can either increase or decrease when it comes into the system. But this is a way of actually essentially pushing back to the rest of the community, saying, help these people so they're not coming to our system, because our system is not helping. Punishment is not helping. This is another movement that's gaining momentum, is non-public safety traffic stops. So most people encounter police through traffic stops, of course. We can break them into two types of traffic stops. There are public safety traffic stops, like running a red light, or speeding, or swerving, or driving dangerously. And the police should stop those people because they're endangering other people's lives. But there are other stops that include tinted windows, or something dangling from your rear window, or a broken tail light or registration. And oftentimes, police will stop those cars. They will ask, they can't be allowed to search, unconstitutional, but they can ask, do you mind if I search your car? And in a tense situation like that, people say yes. And then sometimes, contradictory, not always. And sometimes, of course, these stops lead to death. We've seen it in Minnesota, one of the most famous places, is one of the most famous So there are jurisdictions that are able to stop these non-public safety stops because they're dangerous to police officers, are dangerous to the people who are being stopped. There's also a ton of evidence that says that these stops are racially biased, that black people get stopped a lot more than white people. And so if that's happening, and then if the searches are also happening for black people or a lot more than white people, and then if something like drugs or a gun that's not being used for a crime is found, then what we're finding is that people are being prosecuted for these possession of contraband cases where the initial search and stop is being driven by racial bias or disparities. So there are cities like Philadelphia and Pittsburgh and both at the city council level outlining stops. There are DAs, for example, in Lansing, or let's use police. There are some DAs who are deciding not to prosecute possession cases that arise from these stops. It's like taking a whole series of interactions between people and law out of the equation. This is a study that documented the racial bias in traffic stops. So a study of 100 million traffic stops found significant racial disparities, and the vast majority of searches don't result in evidence recovery. So it's like a really bad way to try to pull drugs or guns out of the community because it's so ineffective and it's so wishy-washy. And I think these slides are just kind of repeating what I've said, so I'm going to skip over them. And this is one last observation. There's been a study about enhancements. I don't know what enhancements are, but they're like charges associated with the case, but that aren't part of the facts of the case. So if you are a store and you are shoplifting, that's the crime. If you have a weapon on you, then you get a weapon enhancement. And there have been studies, this one out of Stanford shows that enhancements lead to more likely pleas and more and higher sentencing. It gives the DA leverage to exact a plea from the defendant, but who's being charged with a minor crime might otherwise justify it. And then the outcomes are mission disparate. That's pretty much it. And I don't know if Ronnie is, but I don't want to. I want to allow a little time for a question and answer, but I know we're over time too. So why don't we just step to that phase now?
How much time do you want to
I would really encourage anyone who has any questions about our district attorney's office or just how their work is proceeding in our county to please take this opportunity to ask a question.
We're open to business. Yes.
Can you hear me?
Barely, but I also have bad hearing.
Can you hear me now?
A little bit better, yeah.
As we've heard, probably the second murder by Andrew Hall did not result in charges being brought against him, to my knowledge, and I wonder why. Is anybody, I don't know that you are the appropriate people to ask that question.
Yeah, unfortunately, because we don't really dive down into individual cases, I'm unsure of the facts of the case or even what type of decision went into that. But I'm really sorry to hear that because I know it's really impacted your community. Yeah. So yeah, I'm sorry I couldn't answer your question.
I have a follow-up question to that.
Sure.
Are there any examples of timelines for the prosecution bringing charges or completing an investigation? Have there ever been precedents where they say, okay, within a year, within 18 months, we'll have this sorted, or does that ever work?
During the life of the case, there are certain areas where there are time limits, but the length of the entire length of when something has to be brought, like how long the timeline of the cases can be pretty arbitrary, which is why sometimes you end up with people sitting in jail on bail for long periods of time. These things are sometimes pretty arbitrary, which they shouldn't be. Yeah.
I have two questions, if that's all right.
Sure.
The first one is, when you're done analyzing the Contra Costa County data, where will it be available?
Okay, sorry, you can take it. I feel like I've been talking this entire time.
It will be available. Where it will be
Where?
available, I think, probably on our website. It's up to the DA if she wants to put it on her website. We haven't actually really been able to inform that's going to be, whether it's going to be a report or something like a slide presentation.
But either way, we could find it eventually on your website in some form.
It should be on our website if you want to.
Cool, thank you. And then my second question was about, it's a little bit of the politics of Vera a little bit. I've noticed a lot of the kind of ideological points for why the criminal justice system doesn't work in the country reflects a lot of the abolition movement going on. But I've noticed that Vera tends to shy away from the term abolition in form of justice reform. And I was wondering if you had like some explanation
So I can clarify that there is not specifically an abolitionist organization. However, all the research that Vera does do is working towards an end goal one day when we don't have to use jails and prisons as our answer for things like mental health, for things like, you know, drug issues, for things like food insecurity. So while we're not strictly, by definition, an abolitionist organization, you do attract people that do have that ideology at the center of the way they do their work, at the center of the way that they plan their programs. So while it's not an abolitionist organization, we are working towards an end goal where we have safe and thriving communities, which means, you know, prisons aren't used as a solution. If that answers your question. I'm sorry if I was sounding like I was politicking, but. Yes.
I guess mine is more of a comment specific to this county. When we were looking for justice for Miles Hall, one of the assembly members who now is pushing forth the 988 was looking for an opportunity to put a timeline on how long a family would have to wait before charges are filed, especially in the case of officer involved killing of a person who lived with mental health, and she learned that there was a lot of resistance to that in this county around any timeline, because that was the first thing, I don't know if you remember that time, that she was pushing for. And then also, if you had to give Contra Costa County a grade around how they're doing, can we honestly, you know, because of course, if you have a benchmark, you can work toward excellence, but if we don't really know how we fit in, I know, you know, I would like to see us get a grade. On an A through F scale.
A through F scale. Can I say our country's at an F? So Contra is somewhere between there and maybe, as you can see by the ground, maybe I'm doing a little bit better. If that, yeah. Unfortunately, I can't really give it a grade.
Yeah, my question is based on the data points.
So, yes.
The data points that you showed were all adult population. Do you do a similar work to track them?
So that was, you know, publicly available data. It actually came from the Department of Justice, reporting from different jurisdictions. Yes, that was, that is the adult population, and the underlying is the denominator is adult population too. I believe numbers like that can be found for juvenile. This actually came from our website. I don't know if we have it there. We also work with, again, we work with DA's data, and it depends on what data you can get access to. So in some jurisdictions where we work, we can do a deeper dive into juvenile data, and others we can't. And actually, unfortunately, here where there were kind of legal prohibitions targeting the juvenile data, so we're going to be mostly adult findings here.
Just due to time, I think we'll have to take one more question. I'm not sure how we're going to see Laudemer's mother, Jeannie, in the white shirt.
Okay, as you said before, that it's up to the judge. If the judge is not doing the right thing, who oversees the judge? Because as far as Angelo was already convicted on the assault with deadly firearms, he is still roaming around and he should be put in custody. So if the judge is not doing the right thing, can you explain to me why?
Yeah, I actually work up in California, so I'm not sure I remember why here. If judges are elected, then there's always an election, but I don't know if they're not, it's actually a really tough thing, so I don't know. Do you know what that is? Are judges elected?
Yeah, so I guess the overseer might be you guys.
And I imagine that just many cases like with a lot of these offices, including DAs in many jurisdictions and judges, there's usually one person running and nobody challenging them. So it often comes down to voices from the community, raising up people who can challenge to get people to pay attention to elections. These are elections that are often closely watched or that draw a lot of turnout. So it comes to the community.